is up, ladies and gentlemen of the online Jamily? This is Shabir Fan 2000 here, and I know a lot of my content, usually from the QUAICast Jamily podcast, has been rather sparing rather recently, and I have been taking some little hiatuses here and there, but I thought I'd come back with a brand new episode here of the QUAICast Jamily podcast, and this is a very special, auspicious occasion of an episode. I am here with one of the longest tenured band members of Jamiroquai, and in today's special episode, I have an interview with one of the, like I said, aforementionedly, one of the longest tenured musicians of Jamiroquai, also a member of the once great jazz funk band Level 42 for literally 8 years. He was also part of the brass section with Jamiroquai going all the way back to 1992, since the early days. So, hence the word long and tenured. But he just recently released a brand new memoir looking back on his many decades in music, working with popular artists in and out of Jamiroquai and Level 42. The book is entitled Blown Out, and it was awesome that he reached out to me, but I thought I'd record a video interview with the one and only Johnny Thirkell, who has a new book out, and I thought I'd do an interview with him here on the Jamly, the QUAICast Jamly podcast. So, Johnny, welcome to the QUAICast, and thank you for this opportunity to interview you, you and your book.
Thank you, Brent. I really appreciate it. Yeah, as you say, I've been around with in and out with Jay on and off since 1992. So it's great. It's lovely to get to chat, share some of those. The purpose of the book's called Blown It, and the
Sorry.
purpose of it was to sort of share. No, that's okay. I just thought I'd get that in there. Right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean that in such a Jay and I have kind of worked together for over 30 years now, right? And as you can imagine, we've had some quite interesting times over the years. Some very crazy and wacky stuff has happened. So I've been telling these stories, not only of Jamiroquai, but all the other bands I've toured and recorded with Tina Turner and Paul McCartney and a whole bunch of other people like this. And over the years, I've told these stories, many, many times. And people, friends have said to me, you should write all this stuff down. So I did. Here we are.
All right. Well, this leads to me in my first question. Given in a bit of a brief summary, can you tell us about your early experiences in music and when you were young, and how you ended up coming to the trumpet as your choice instrument? And I'm sure you're probably multi-instrumentalist and you play other brass, but what ultimately led you to playing the trumpet at such a young age and getting into the trumpet as your primary instrument?
Yeah, well, I was actually quite late. I was 14 when I started to play. And it started actually from every week at school in the maths lesson. We had double maths, and every week this guy, a couple of rows in front of me, he would get up like 20 minutes before the end of maths and just casually stroll out of the room, and nobody said anything. Right, so I thought, well, let's find out what that's all about. So I called this guy. The guy's name was Ken Brown, and I called Ken and I said, "What's all that about then?" And he said, "Oh, I'm in the school band, and so I get to leave maths 20 minutes early because we need to set up for band practice at lunchtime." So right, if anybody knows my mathematical capabilities, anything to get out of 20 minutes of maths. So that's how it started. I said, well, "Okay, where do I sign?" So I joined the school band, and I lived grew up, should I say, in the northeast of England, where there is a big brass band tradition. So it's a coal mining area. I was a coal miner when I left school. That's what I did when I left school. And every village has its own brass band, so there's plenty of outlets. So I started with the cornet, and it's something I took to, and you know what I mean. And eventually, I ended up doing it as a career. And eventually, I moved to. As I say, I worked at the coal mine for a couple of years, and then got myself some qualifications, and I went to the Leeds College of Music, and that was my sort of route out of there, and eventually ended up in London. And here we are, still there.
All right. This leads to me, and then of course you would move on and join many artists along your path, and you would end up becoming a key member of the groundbreaking jazz funk band aforementionedly, Level 42. Can you tell us how you joined this key band of their time and how their sound evolved in the 8 years that you were performing with that, that amazing band?
Yeah, well, I like lots of these things, Brent. I've toured with all kinds of bands, the Brand New Heavies and Level 42 and Swing Out Sister and Lisa Stansfield. I'm still trying. And like all of these, it comes largely out of working with them in the studio. So I will get initially with Level 42, I worked a lot then with the sax player called Gary Barnacle. The two of us, we had a horn section. In fact, Gary was the first on the first, maybe the first two albums, certainly the first album of the Emergency on Planet Earth album. But Gary and I worked together a lot, and we were booked to go down to the Isle of Wight and record an album with Level 42. And at the end of the album, we all got on, everyone got on well. And so Mark King, this singer and the bass player, said, "Listen, we're going on tour next year. How do you fancy joining us?" And that was
Mm.
it. And so I was there for 8 years, as you say. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean
great.
that's an amazing amount of time in a band like Level 42. I mean, for me, in my personal experience, I came across Level 42 probably very, very young. But I thought the music was absolutely amazing. I mean, I've always gravitated to R&B soul for my musical leanings. But my next question is actually concerning your lovely book. In the time period between 1984 to 1985, in your book, you discussed in the midst of a studio recording break a chance encounter with the enigmatic David Bowie. Could you tell us about
Okay.
what happened in that chance meeting that is in your book?
It's quite unusual, really. I was, by this stage, Gary Barnacle and myself, we were pretty busy guys. We built some kind of a reputation in London, and particularly in this kind of pop music scene. That there's lots of different kind of avenues in the studio scene in London. Very busy, or it was then anyway. You could be in film sessions, or you could be in, jingles, or TV work, or
Yeah.
pop music, or whatever it was. And we built a kind of a reputation for ourselves, and we were recording um, some tracks for the Absolute Beginners album
Hmm.
at a studio called West Side Studios
Yeah.
in West London. And we're in a little break, we're having a break, something's going on in there. And I wander up to the canteen. I'm just kind of up to the kitchen. I'm just sitting there reading something. And in walks David Bowie. And, okay. So he said, "Hey, want a cup of tea?" Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. And so I found myself in the buzz. And I have a sister who's 10 years old, or I had a sister. Sadly, she passed away. But my sister, who was 10 years older than me, and a huge Bowie fan.
Hmm.
And so I thought she was the first thing I thought of. Like, Susan's going to go crazy. Yeah. So he made me a cup of tea, and we sat down. We had a chat. He plays the saxophone, and we
Hmm.
had a chat about,
Yeah.
of all things, mouthpieces. The difference between trumpet mouthpieces, saxophone mouthpieces, and all. And my sister was absolutely horrified when I spoke to her later and told her about this. She said, you get, "You're sitting with David Bowie and you're talking about mouthpieces. What's wrong with you idiots?" you know, that
No.
was our commonality. That was our common
Yeah.
ground, right?
Yeah, I mean,
We
I've
knew.
only had a few little touching moments meeting like musical heroes, and talking to Jay. That's probably the closest to a musical hero that I've actually met in real life. You just talk about the weirdest things, and I think the first thing I said to Jay was fish and chips preference, and he looked at me like, well, a funny icebreaker I could think of. But this leads me to my next question from your book. While you were on tour with Jamiroquai during an Asian tour leg in the early 90s, you were kidnapped by the Japanese mafia. Could you tell us a little brief explanation about those tense events that happened over in Japan?
Yeah, it's one of those kind of bizarre situations. And look, there's a lot of sort of vacillation about this. Basically, this was the very first tour of Japan with Jamiroquai in
Hmm.
1993,
Yep.
um, and we had been playing before we flew to Japan. We'd done it was like a college ball. I mean, these were the early, in these days, Brent, Jamiroquai wasn't the huge machine it is now, right?
Yeah.
It was a bunch of scruffy kids we went everywhere on a minute in a splitter van, and these were the very early days. Um, and we played at a Cambridge ball, and it was a pretty raucous affair. These things are it's kind of legalized debauchery, really, and there are lots of all sorts of stuff going on. Anything you wanted, drink, drugs, the whole thing. This is the whole. I'm not talking about the band. I'm talking about the whole event, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're pretty well aware when we got on the plane to go to Japan, and everybody's drinking. Mm, and by the time we got there, we were all pretty well pickled, and we happened to get stopped by the Japanese customs. And long story short, Jay was, you know, Jay's always been a fiery guy, right? I mean, he's always
Very
he's very
brash, very, yeah.
sure. He's very passionate about everything. Okay, he's very passionate about his music, very passionate about his family, he's very passionate about his songwriting. He's also very passionate when things don't go, when something happens that he doesn't
Yeah.
like, right? And so he kicked off, and it was all. That's it. We're going home. Forget. I'm not doing the tour. That's it. I'm not going to be treated like this. This is blah 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 blah. Look, we've all been drinking all night. Okay.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
we're getting led into the room, and there's the sound of thwacking rubber gloves and all this. We're going. But long story short, all of it, like instantly from being about to being having our internal cavities searched, the whole thing just sort of disappeared and it went away,
Hmm.
and that was it. So off we go. But Jay's still pretty angry, and I'm not this it the tour's off and all this kind of nonsense. Anyway, the next day I woke up with a blinding headache, dreadful hangover, and I leave the hotel. And yeah, in short, the next I walk out of the hotel door, and before I know it, I'm in a big black car with some very large Japanese fellas and I don't want to give too much away, otherwise people won't buy the book. But
Yes, of course.
basically, it would appear that the one Japanese guy, he explained to me that there was a little bit of a hiatus. There was a little problem they had to sort out, but he said, "I'm sure we'll sort it out, and then everything will be fine." But I spent a very, very scary 4 or 5 hours,
Mm.
not knowing where I was and what was going to happen. But anyway, it blew over.
Yeah.
But I can only assume, and nobody's told me this in person, but I can only assume that I was the collateral that made the tour go ahead.
Hmm. Yeah. But I can imagine the tense environment that can be.
It was pretty scary.
I can imagine. And also in your new book, you talk about in the midst of working with a lot of musical artists and bands, how you came into the unexpected stratosphere of the aforementioned a brash young J.K. The lead singer of the fledgling Jamiroquai in 1992. Could you tell us more about your first impressions of this doe-eyed young musical maverick and what your experience in recording one of their first singles in the fourth thoughtful single, of course, technically their first single before When You Gonna Learn, or at least released in sequentialness from during when they signed with Acid Jazz of Too Young to Die. Can you tell us your experiences with that?
Look, I mean, Jay, he's an extraordinary person. He really is an extraordinary person. And my first impressions of this guy was a scruffy ass kid. I remember I'd been around as a studio player for 10 years 15 years by this stage. And I played with all kinds of bands. And, I find this kid, and he has got what seems to me infinitely more confidence than his position would suggest, as it were.
Yeah.
Right. But you quickly learn that his confidence is not misplaced. He is an uh, incredibly insightful, smart. He's one of the few people that I work with that I would say he's probably a genius. And with that, along with that comes there's another side to that, right? He's and it actually, in many respects, Mark King was a very similar character. They both actually no, maybe not, but anyway, as far as Jay is concerned, he has a very clear idea of what he wants, and it's very easy to get frustrated when you're not delivering that. Okay, and I think the knack with Jay is you need to be on your toes to keep up with him because his brain will go at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and you'll work
Mm-hmm.
out a line, you'll play it, and by the time you finish recording it, he's changed his mind. Right, he wants something
Mm-hmm.
different, and it's a way of working that takes a little bit of getting used to, right? But actually, if you just hang on to his coattails and just go along for the ride, then I think the perfect example is you and I spoke the other day. I spoke about the track "Hooked Up," right?
Mm-hmm.
We had gone there, and I think Gary Barnacle had done an arrangement, and we'd done some of we had played, recorded some of it, and Jay came and sang an idea, and I said, "Nate, that's the worst idea I've ever heard of. It sounds dreadful, awful." I don't really know that tune "Hooked Up," but the horn line goes da 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 da. I think it sounds like a fire in a pet shop. It's awful. But Jay being Jay, no, that's what I want. That's what I want. And
Yeah.
bugger me, he was right. For me, it's one of my favorite horn lines from that
Yeah.
Emergency album.
Yeah.
And I think it's an example of supreme confidence. He's very, very self-confident. Jay always has been. Remember, here he's like 18 now at this stage, 18, 19, something
18
like.
years old. Yeah.
I
Incredible.
know, it's mad. And here's me, Charlie Big Potatoes. I've been around, I'm 10 years older than Jay. I've done this and I've done that. And here was this kid telling me what horn lines we should be playing. But actually, he was, he what he hears in his head he's really good at drawing that out of people. Right? One of the
Yeah.
kind of knacks I think of working with studio musicians is drawing the best out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And Jay, sometimes he draws it out of you, sometimes he batters it out of you, sometimes it gets dragged out of you kicking and screaming. But the
Yeah.
end result, we've all seen the end result.
Mm-hmm.
So he can be challenging. Jay can be a challenging guy to work with. But I think what you have to understand is that he holds himself to a very high standard.
Mm-hmm.
Consequently, holds everybody else to the same high standard. And if you can cope with that, if you can take that, then you'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Some band members ended up leaving because of that brashness, because of that, forethoughtlessness, and I mean, you stuck in there and took it, but brilliance and greatness came with that music. I mean, Jamiroquai still sets a major earmark on being one of the first major environmentally conscious bands of their time. This was
Mm.
literally nearly a decade removed before Bono grew a mullet and decided, hey, let's save the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Literally a
yeah,
decade before.
yeah.
My next question from your book, you talked briefly about the recording of Jamiroquai's debut album in 1993, Mercy of Planet Earth. Do you have any interesting anecdotes or anything you can tell me about that first album recording sessions, how it went with the young Jamiroquai?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was quite haphazard,
Mm,
right? I
very
think
happy.
they're young guys, and their brain is all over the place, and I'm by this stage I'm 10 years old. Like I say, I'm 10 years older than those guys were, and I've been around the block and I've seen how it works, and I've seen many bands spend an absolute fortune, wasting money, not realizing it's their money that they're wasting, right?
Yeah.
But the smart ones learn, and Jay learned very, very quickly, right? That actually it's great having a taxi sitting outside all night waiting to take, or he's sending a limo to go and pick up fish and chips or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
it's actually ultimately you're paying for that stuff, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, but Jay was super smart, and he worked that out pretty quickly. But it was quite haphazard. You would, I think we recorded. There's a tune on the first album called Revolution '93.
Great. 1993. Yeah.
And the plan originally was to record that all together, like a live.
Wow.
Not how in recording sessions, it's you put down the
One
rhythm
take.
section.
One take.
Yeah, that's right. So that was the plan. The plan was, like I said, normally you would layer everything up. You do all the rhythm section, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
this, and then the string, and blah 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 blah. But the plan for that was to record it as live. So we went to a studio. I can't remember what it was for the life of it. It'll come to me in a minute. But Livingston Studios. We went to Livingston
Yeah.
Studios, and we start at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock start. Right, we're going to record it as live. We rehearse it. bang, put on the tape machine and rock. So Gary and I turn up at 10:15, right? We're old hand studio musicians, we're there ready to play at 10 o'clock. I think the next band person turned up about 2 o'clock or something like that in the
Hmm.
afternoon. And then people would kind of gradually drift in, and some would drift off, and some would, right? It was like herding cats. It's all pretty chaotic. And we actually started recording, I think, about 9 o'clock in the evening is when we started recording. So we had to really abandon the idea of doing it live, and we did it live-ish,
Hmm.
and then lots of overdubs over top. But it was all a bit sort of, the bus would leave whenever you go on a gig. The bus would always leave 2 hours after it was supposed to leave because somebody had got the time wrong, or they weren't listening, it was all a bit sort of chaotic. And now, of course, all these years later, I've been playing with Jay on and off, for that 30 odd years.
Yeah.
But now when I go in, you see this huge machine, right, that grinds on relentlessly, and everything's organized. Everyone knows what they're doing, right, and it's really smooth. But it wasn't like that in the beginning. It was, in fact, quite the opposite. It was very chaotic, but fun.
Yeah.
I mean, great fun. It's quite exciting. We did a
Yeah.
we did a live radio broadcast. I remember. Um, Muff Winwood, who's the sort of A&R guy for the label, pulled off an absolute coup for getting this new band, Jamiroquai, a headline slot on a series called In the City. It was filmed in
Yeah.
Thirkell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the recordings of most things on YouTube, aren't there? Right? But I think
Yeah.
there's
They're
recordings
all over the place. They're all over the place.
there's recordings of that first. It was a big deal for the band at that time. It wasn't a well-known band at all.
Yeah.
And it's live on BBC Radio 1. We go straight up to the 7 o'clock news, and at about 6:30, the band's not even there. They haven't even arrived yet. So my poor old Mutt pulling his hair out, and eventually and if you listen very carefully on the first song on that broadcast, you can. I mean, that we're still plugging equipment in.
Yeah. You just hear
It's a
the
live
clicks and
broadcast.
the clatters of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
amplifier.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's uh, bum, bum, ba-da-ba-ba-ba, right? Okay, the first couple of notes of that are missing from Toby's keyboard because he's playing with one hand and plugging the keyboard in with the other. It's absolute
Yeah.
chaos. Life on the edge is quite exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be very, very exciting. And this comes up near the close of your book. You do reflect back on all the music that you performed on, the amazing releases that you produced, the coincidental closeness to living there at JK and there in England. Do you have any regrets that you in your whole career of recording music that you wish you could go back in time and fix, or do you feel fulfilled in your musical career of nearly 40 years in music?
I think, look, if I thought hard enough about it, I'm sure I could find some things that I regret, but it feels like, I feel like I've had a charmed life, a
Yeah.
kid who left school and went to work in a coal mine, and here I am, so
Yeah.
I've no grounds really. I mean, some absolutely mental stuff happened in the in between times,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think, obviously there are always things. Actually, there is one Jamiroquai related thing which I would regret's not the right word, but I wish it had gone smoother. A couple of
Hmm.
years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we did a gig in Malaga. It was a festival, huge festival, 35,000 people there or something like this. And this was meant to. So Jay, it was one of the. Jay brought in a horn section. The band weren't using horns at that time, but brought in myself and Paul Booth. The idea being, this is kind of the 30th anniversary. I've been doing the band. We'd started 30 years ago, and we were going to do a version of When You're Gonna Learn. Uh,
Oh, I actually remember this. I actually remember
yeah.
this.
Jay, as is his wont, halfway through the show, wanders over to me and points to me to do a solo. It's a tune I didn't really know. But he points. That's fine. Yeah, I'll do that. I don't mind. But literally, as he pointed to me, my in-ear monitors, boom, went. They
Mm.
just switched off. Nothing. So I've got big monitors in my ear, but the nothing's coming through. There's absolute racket on the stage. It's very, very loud up there. And so I proceeded to play a solo, and it's only halfway through I realized I'm actually playing in the wrong key. I'm playing in a different key to
We're in the wrong key. Yeah.
but I couldn't hear a thing. I was literally, it was like playing by numbers, Brent. I was just blowing
Mm,
in the thin end and
yeah.
pressing the buttons down, playing but anyway, I wish that had gone better because it was a
Yeah.
really nice occasion, right? 30 years after we'd done that duet, ba-da-da, ba-da-da, do-da-da-do-da-da, that one, okay? Then, oh no, sorry, it's not When You're Gonna Let Us Blow Your Mind. I'm sorry,
Blow
that's
your
what I meant.
mind.
Blow Your Mind,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. That's the senility creeping in there, Brent.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think regrets not really. No, there are things
Yeah.
maybe I should have done differently, but it's a futile exercise. Right? I've had the most charmed life I couldn't imagine. I've lived a life that when I took up the trumpet at 14, I had no idea this life even existed, let alone aspire to it. So I've no complaints whatsoever.
Okay, cool. These last questions here in this interview are going to be basically are just going to be some odds and end questions I really wanted to ask. What,
Yeah,
respectively, are your favorite Level 42 and Jamiroquai songs to perform?
crumbs. Well, I would say "Blow Your Mind" probably is always a good one, right? I mean, l- l- honestly, when did we record that? 1993. Okay, 2003, 13. So that's 2003 to 13, 20. That's 32 years ago. And I promise you, I can play it. You could give me a trumpet. You could wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I could play it without any mistakes at all. I know it
Yeah.
inside out. And Jay and I, in the early days, not so much lately, but in the early days, you know, because that started with it. That was started with Jay, right? He started. That was just like a scat riff that he sang, and
Mm-hmm.
then we had the idea of me overdubbing with the trumpet with the tin muting, you know. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's always a nice one to. It's always a nice one to play live. But I am I enjoy all of them. There are no tunes I don't really like. Obviously, a lot of the more recent stuff is particularly brass oriented.
Yeah,
So
it's more synthy. It's more like backup keyboards,
mm,
pre-recorded backing tracks and samples.
yeah.
That's a
And I
lot
think
of
I think
yeah,
that's one of the reasons why Jay's still motoring along, right? Still in
yeah,
the fast lane
yeah,
because he hadn't never sat on his laurels, right? He could have just churned out more Space Cowboy albums. He could have
yeah,
done that, but he didn't. He's
yeah,
taken all kinds of twists and turns,
yeah,
and if anybody's going to pull it off, it's going to be him.
yeah. That's certainly
Level 42, maybe the answer is Heaven in Your Hands, I suppose. It starts with a big old trumpet.
good one. Good
Yeah,
choice.
yeah, it
Good
starts with a
choice.
big old trumpet thing. So I get to go to the front and flex my muscles a little bit. Have a
Yeah,
born show off, right? So yeah,
yeah.
that would be the level 42 one, I think.
Certainly. Good choice. Do you have any advice for young musicians who decide to take up the trumpet or brass in their music career? Do you have any advice for, any little tips and tricks you can pass on to young musicians who decide to go into the brass section or decide to take up the trumpet as their instrument for life in their
Yeah,
music
I mean, I
career?
wouldn't. That's not necessarily brass specific. I think any musician trying to go
Hmm.
into it's a very difficult industry to go into. But it's a one irrespective of the level of your success. It's a thing that will give you the greatest life you could possibly imagine, right?
Yeah.
But I would say the best advice I can give to anybody who wants to go into the music industry is don't be a dick,
Ah,
right? Get it 100%, 100%. Nobody wants to work with an asshole, right?
yeah.
Right. What you need to do is I think go keep your eyes and ears open,
Hmm.
okay, and listen to what's going on. Read the room, and basically, our job I'm not a studio musician is that's what I am. It's to all intents and purposes. I think our job is to find out what the artist wants and give it to him. That's
Yeah.
it. That's the top and bottom of it. And
Y-
if you parade around with your chest puffed out, that's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Okay? And just
It's
learn how to get along with people.
Yes, certainly. It's always a cohesive collaborations of convalescence you've always got to follow for in any band or any band environment. But that's some great advice for any aspiring musicians. And this comes to my final question for you. What are your thoughts on Jamiroquai's musical sound and tonal shifts that you witnessed over the last 8 studio albums, we're verging into the ninth album era sometime here in the first or second quarter of 2026? Over the past 30 years, what have you thought about Jamiroquai's musical evolution, at least in your opinion?
Well, look, obviously, I prefer the early albums, right? Because
Yeah.
they are
Well, I'm an
slightly
OG of of the Jamley, but but the
yeah.
musical evolution has been so
I
interesting.
it is. Look, I think I've possibly answered this question already. I think many artists will sit on their laurels and just kind of churn out more of the same. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not Jay. That's not his.
Not Jay, ever
That's
changing.
not Jay. That's not Jay. And he's a guy I think who likes to work on the edge. Right, a number of
Always good.
times recording those albums. All the band tracks are almost done, and Jay still hasn't finished the song, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's that pressure that drives him forward. And
Yeah.
I think a number of times, particularly for me, the first major shift was Deeper Underground. I think that was.
Yeah.
I remember Jay because like Jay lives like a mile down the road from where I'm sitting now. And I remember him saying, "Come down, hey, Johnny, come down and have a listen. Let me know what you think about this is the new stuff we work on." And I was absolutely amazed because it was nothing like the previous albums. It was a
Mm-hmm.
total shift.
Yeah.
But as I said earlier, if anyone can pull that off, I think it's him. He
Yeah.
can. He is. I think he's an extraordinary character. He can be hard to work with sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but also he can be an absolute sweetheart.
Hmm.
I think it is this his sense of he drives himself very hard, and if you
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be involved, then you got to drive yourself hard too, and that's
Yeah.
that's why here we are 9 albums later, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's still selling records, and people are still want to see him, and people,
Yeah.
I mean, I did a couple of shows last year.
Yeah.
I think there was one in Portsmouth somewhere. I think that was the one you were at, actually. I think you
Victorious,
were there,
Victorious
Brandon.
Festival.
Yes.
Anybody who's watching this QUAICast doesn't know what he's referencing. I actually got invited by the band Jamiroquai. People watch my videos here on my channel, but just the short end of the story, I got invited, and I was actually standing there in the rain in Portsmouth watching Jamiroquai for an absolutely phenomenal 2.5 hour concert. And I did see you, Johnny, way back, tucked in the back corner, right behind
Yeah,
Matt. And
absolutely.
poor Matt.
Yeah.
I mean, it was raining so badly that the studio crew had to come out there and tarp off some of his keyboards,
Yeah,
specifically the
yeah.
Wurlitzer and the Hammond, because it was
Seems to be a
raining so
pattern
hard.
with It seems to be a pattern with Jamiroquai festival gigs,
With
right?
the
Right.
clement weather, yes.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
it's a pattern with England. But
No,
what
but
I was going to say, so there was that, and then I think we did another couple more that year,
hmm
the festival with horns. And man, oh man, like he walks out there and bang, he's got them in his hand. It's extraordinary, really. Okay, after all these years, right?
hmm
And I'm sorry to eulogize about it, but look, it's a Jamiroquai podcast, right? Well, I'm not going to slag him off.
yeah.
I don't have any reason to anyway, right? He's always been very kind to me, and he's always been a good friend to me.
hmm
Um, but it's extra. I'm gonna watch that, and I think that is just extraordinary. After all these years, he can still walk out there, and that was on the smaller side. That festival, probably 15 or 20,000 people or something
hmm
like that, right?
Yeah.
And bang, instantaneously, he's got them in the palm of his hand, and
Yeah.
that is quite an extraordinary skill. It really
I
is an
mean,
extraordinary skill.
to witness Jay, I saw Jamiroquai in my personal history of seeing Jamiroquai live. My first time seeing them was actually nearly, and I've been at the Jamley for over 30 years. Was actually in 2018, at Forest Hill Stadium in New York City in Brooklyn.
Okay,
Also in the rain, with
yeah,
15,000 people strong, and to watch Jay work that stage, and my God, the poor. That I don't know if they pay the soundboard guy extra money on stage, but the way he goes over on with this is before he got the in the ear
in the
studio
ears,
mics.
yeah,
The way
yeah,
he going up and down with the levels like every 5 seconds, I not seen in a lead singer of a band this much
Yeah.
in a
Well,
long
you know what,
time.
Brent? It's another example, right, of Jay's
Yeah.
perfectionism, right?
Yeah,
That's it.
professionalism and just knowing
Exactly.
what he.
A lot of, I mean,
Yeah.
it happens a lot. It happens a lot because, when you do the sound check there, it's one thing, but there's nobody there. Okay,
Hmm.
the atmosphere is different. And when it comes to the gig, but everyone will sound check, and you'll see the guitarist. They're playing, nicey, and then it comes to the gig, bang, up goes the amp.
Yeah.
So it's nothing like the sound check. And so for
Yeah.
a guy who's singing, right, that's a physical thing. Jay hasn't gotten the same as with the trumpet, right? We don't have a button to turn up to make us
Hmm.
louder, right? So he's got to work harder. So Jay wants,
Yeah.
it's important to him that he gets the right thing. And a lot of artists will just live with it. But Jay is a perfectionist, and
Hmm.
he will, and yeah, I mean, he will ride the monitor guy for sure. But
Yeah.
that's the guy's job, right? It's the guy's
Yeah.
job to give Jay
Yeah.
what he wants. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
all of our job.
I mean, the professionalism in Jamiroquai, not just in Jay, but all the band members, past, present, and future, have been absolutely phenomenal and kept this machine going for Jamiroquai. But this has been an amazing, engrossing interview, and I cannot thank you enough, Johnny, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here on the QUAICast. And by the way, Johnny's new book called Blown It. I finally got it right.
Good man, good.
His book Blown It is available at all major online booksellers, I should say, in digital and physical copies. And I'll be sure to put all the information down in the description area of this episode of the QUAICast down below, so you can get your own copy of this book. I highly recommend everybody in the Jamily to pick up this book, either digital or physical. It's got a lot of great, amazing stories, not to mention a lot of behind-the-scenes stories from Johnny here about the early days of Jamiroquai, the modern days of Jamiroquai, and all the other amazing artists that he's worked with in nearly 45 years. It is an amazing read. I hope everyone in the Jamily gets to pick up the book and read it in your own time. But as we end this episode of the QUAICast podcast here, Johnny, is there anything you would like to say to close with for this podcast interview?
Well, look, I'd like to, thanks, Brent, for having me. It's been actually a real pleasure to chat to you. I think we're all on the same page when it comes to Jay and to Jamiroquai. I'm currently not touring with the band. The band on. I'm too old to be doing that kind of stuff these days. Right? But it's been an amazing 30 odd years that I've spent, and like I said, he's always been a good friend to me as well as a good boss. And look, the book, there's lots of stories of Jamiroquai time on the road and the crazy things that happen. There's also a link to there's a kind of a QR code in the book which will take you to a web page where I'm constantly uploading. There's a whole bunch of photographs that the world hasn't seen of the band and Jay and everybody on tour all over the place. There's
Hmm.
some interesting stuff there and some video footage. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been an interesting thing for me to write this book. And as I look back on 30 years of Jamiroquaiing, it's been an absolute hoot.
Yeah. And it's been nothing but an honor and a privilege for us Jamiroquai fans, old and new, to have been along for the ride for that. And your contribution to Jamiroquai is greatly appreciated. And anytime I listen to the old stuff, I think about you and I think about all the amazing musicians that came into the stratosphere of Jamiroquai and helped embolden the sound for going now over 32 years of the history. And I can only do is thank you for this interview. But again, this was a special episode of the QUAICast podcast. Thank you everyone for watching. I will hopefully be having some more content, at least audio-wise, coming here on the QUAICast podcast very soon, recounting pretty much some of the news that I've been missing out on reporting on the QUAICast podcast because, life, America, everything's been very hectic right now. So, but I thank everybody in the online family for tuning in to this content. Be sure to check this out in the audio form, which I will be uploading over on Spotify and, of course, on my YouTube channel. But thank you again for Johnny for being here for this great special episode of the QUAICast podcast. And everybody in the family, if you can, go and pick up his new book, Blown It. It is an amazing, amazing recounting of his 40 years in neuro pop music, not just in Jamiroquai, but with many, many artists of the Mag Nation. But as always, this is Jamiroquai 2000. Thank you again for watching this episode of the QUAICast Jamily podcast, and I'll see you again really soon here on YouTube, over on Spotify, and many other places. Bye bye, everybody. Take care. Happy New Year,
Yeah.
and stay funky, everybody.